From the tabletop to your computer, Game Master Gun. Greetings and well met, fellow harrowing travelers. This is Game Master Gun with another episode of whatever the fuck I do. So, today I wanted to write a video response. I wanted to write a video. And I'm also going to sing you a novel. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Today I'm doing a video response to fucking Mavis Bacon. In response, he wrote in response to my last video, writing an RPG, some of his thoughts, and I wanted to take those into consideration. I wanted to make it seem like I actually listened to people. I wanted to make it. The Merovingian writes, you did not define what genre of RPG or what RPG you were offering writing tips in your title or description. He forgot the word for. We'll let it pass. I personally am a D&D Pathfinder player myself, trying to learn to DM, but what if somebody stumbled upon your video looking for some tips for Call of Cthulhu, DC Universe, or Warhammer 40k? I am not trying to nitpick, just trying to remind you that the RPG world is not quite as small as people tend to think. And with that last sentence, I totally agree. I have been in soups games, I've been in horror games, I've played, everything from GURPS to a Harry Potter high school hijinks game. Don't ask. What I wanted to point out was, I totally recognize that the RPG universe is way more massive than just D&D or just Pathfinder or whatever game happens to be, well known wherever you play games at. But whenever I walk into the local gaming store, my local gaming store, whenever I walk in there, that was a bad joke. Whenever I walk into my local gaming store, the hobby shop, and I go into the back room, the game room, because most hobby shops have that back game room, usually with green tables. I don't know why. Most of what I see people playing are action-adventure, fantasy, role-playing games. So D&D, Pathfinder, even Warhammer has a fantasy role-playing game. So the majority of the things that I've been playing in have elves and dwarves and magic and swords and that traditional stuff. And it's even gone so far as the group that I DM prefers that over doing, say, a modern game or a futuristic game, sci-fi or something. Or I've even wanted to DM a game where we're in Kansas City, and I just lay out the atlas, and people have to, survive the zombie apocalypse or, make their way to a certain area. And I've even done a Call of Cthulhu game set in Kansas City, but it was not as well received as dwarves, elves, the fucking birds. Yeah. So what I wanted to start on here was Manjixel Chigo Dime a Dozen, whatever your name was. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. I can't pronounce your name. I gave the rules of writing for Pixar, and it wasn't 16, it was 22, but whatever. I gave the 22 rules of Pixar writing, and I gave the 10-point system. And it doesn't have to apply to any one particular genre. It's completely separate from genre. I'm making words with my mouth. Genre is also separate from rule systems. So if you're in a Pathfinder game, you can play any type of game you want. If you're in Call of Cthulhu, you can toss in some sci-fi elements. If you're playing GURPS, GURPS is probably the best example, you can play anything. It doesn't have to be whatever system you've chosen. It can be anything you want. So, take for example, and my notes are over here. I should have put them behind the camera, but I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Take for example the insanity system found in D&D 3.0 and the insanity system found in Call of Cthulhu. D&D 3.0 had a very brief sanity system. You rolled a d20, there's a table with 5 things on it, you either got multiple personality disorder, a phobia, what else was there? schizophrenia, night terrors. There was a very few amount of things on it. While Call of Cthulhu offers an entire fucking part of the book to it. Now, I love this. I love this example. In fact, I encourage you to go out and get the Call of Cthulhu book, because props to you guys who make it.
I'm making words with my mouth.
I encourage anybody to go get the Call of Cthulhu book, because it's got some really good role-playing elements in it that you can just kind of rip out. In fact, there's a table of insanities in here that you roll, D100, and you figure out what insanity your character has got. Is he afraid of spiders, or... Here, book moment. We're going to have a book moment. So, this is this... the table is labeled A Psychiatric Glossary for Present Day. Logorrhea, copious, coherent, logical speak. Interesting. Mania, mood characterized by elation and increased activity. Neurosis. The term refers to to the theory of intrapsychic conflicts resulting in symptoms of depression, anxiety, etc. The neurotic patient in relatively good mental health compared to a schizophrenic. Obsession. Everybody knows what that is. Paranoia, psychosis, somnolence, abnormal drowsiness. Toss that into your next sentence and see how your friends respond. I'm feeling a little bit somnolent right now. A tic. Trance, derealization, disassociation, formication, hallucination. There's hundreds of things in here. Now, one book has more rules than the other book. One rule system, should I say, has more rules for it than another system. But that doesn't mean that you have to limit yourself to what is in the rule system that you're currently playing. You can take something from Call of Cthulhu and implement it. The reason I bring this up is it essentially means that you can play any genre in any rule system. You do not have to limit yourself to action-adventure in Pathfinder, or horror in Call of Cthulhu, or action war game in Warhammer. You can do anything, because it's up to the players. It's up to the DM. It's up to you. So, let's do some stuff. Let's start with science fiction. Science fiction is a good one. Science fiction does not have to be super, super future robots and fucking psionic rays. It doesn't need to be an ice cream cone. Sci-fi can be anything that is a development of technology in the era it was written. So, take for instance Mark Twain. I love Mark Twain. Everybody knows Mark Twain for Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, etc. The man also wrote science fiction, and it wasn't the best science fiction in the world, but it was definitely interesting. In fact, Mark Twain, and you have to remember this was written almost 100 years ago, he predicted the internet. He had a particular story talking about how a man was looking into a screen, and he got quite irate when bothered in his concentrations. Or however it was written. I'm not Mark Twain.
I'm making words with my mouth.
I'm not capable of keeping thoughts in my head. So, Mark Twain's version of science fiction was something that we would now consider very elementary, in fact almost childish, because the internet already exists. Nowadays we have, the Oculus Rift and laser light shows, or whatever people are writing about. So you can take a sci-fi element and put it into another game, no matter what it is. You could take, let's take your medieval fantasy. That's the traditional medieval fantasy. You can toss in some sci-fi elements, no matter what system it's in. One of my favorites, and one that is just so cliche by this point, but it still applies, is guns in a medieval setting. Because that's a big thing when the guns come around. And in fact, even, one thing that Pathfinder did over D&D was incorporate actual gun classes and gun skills and stuff, while in D&D it was just like a little side note mention. It adds a certain degree of science fiction in contrast. And let's say you're playing Pathfinder. Guns already in there. That's not science fiction anymore. Make them a car. Make them the first preliminary car, the first preliminary motorcycle, where the gnomes have discovered some kind of new magic that allows them to make technology that's a little bit beyond their time. Or, the elves bind together wood and sticks and skulls and they create the world's first Harley. And all of a sudden you have a little science fiction element inside a greater medieval fantasy. In fact, as an example to that, Terry Pratchett's Discworld has a moment where the librarian, you don't know any of these characters unless you watch the series. Unless you watch the books, you don't know what I'm talking about. Makes a motorcycle out of magic and bits and pieces of things that he found lying around. And it's kind of interesting because Death ends up getting it, like the incarnation of Death, and he rides it around. Whatever. You can put sci-fi elements inside your fantasy universe. Adventure, action, fantasy is all your typical stuff that you'd find. Adventure is just going around and seeing new sights. It's the Lord of the Rings where you're traversing new lands and you're going and seeing things and experiencing things that normally you wouldn't have experienced. Adventure is the easy one inside most role-playing systems. Except for in Call of Cthulhu, where it's kind of difficult because that's mostly, investigative, mystery, horror. But you could totally do that. You could have a Call of Cthulhu game where everybody travels to Africa, which seems to be very typical in the game, and they have to go from place to place, and it suddenly becomes more of an adventure. You're just inserting that little bit of the genre into that particular game. Same way with action. Call of Cthulhu is not supposed to be an action game. You're not supposed to shoot the Elder Gods. And you can still put a little bit of action in it. Maybe during their time there, during their time in the city, or during the time that they're doing this investigation, the characters find a group of, cut purses. And they have to dispatch the cut purses, or they have to get into a fight to, beat them so they can get some information or something. You can fucking put a plot line in that. Insert the plot line into the thing. You can insert almost any genre into any rule set. Fantasy can fit in anything. If you're playing D20 Modern, insert an elf. If you're... That's a really gross over-exaggeration. I still think it holds true, though. So, if you're playing fantasy, or if you're playing another system, you can insert a little bit of fantasy into it. You can make, maybe in Call of Cthulhu it would be most conductive, because it's not naturally fantasy, but magic can be accepted in that kind of system. And in fact, I think there's rules for magic, but nobody ever wants to play the mage unless they totally want to go insane. D20 Modern, same way. Insert the spells from D&D into it, It's not that big of a change. It's still fairly balanced. And all of a sudden you have a little bit of fantasy, maybe one of the villains is a magic caster. You have a little bit of something different in there. Something, that'll catch players' eyes, and it's fantasy. I think the only one I haven't touched on is romance. Romance in an RPG. I have heard stories of it being a good idea. In fact, D&D, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3, had a book called The Book of Erotic Fantasy, which was all about the mating habits of different races and the rules for, sex in an RPG universe. They added a profession for blowjobs. You can put romance in an RPG, but considering RPGs are kind of meant for groups of 3 to 5 people usually, careful. They added a profession for blowjobs. So, to kind of wrap this around, you can still do the 10 rules of writing, no matter what genre you're in. And this is to you, Markovi, Manji. I can't pronounce your name. I don't know how to do it. It doesn't matter what rule system you're using. It doesn't matter, how you play your games, how you DM your games. You will find a genre that fits you. And the 10 rules of writing are a very basic way to start writing whatever interests you. It's a good way to start. So, last time I did the 10 rules of writing for fantasy, you guys got to sit here and watch Zeke kind of get himself confused and get himself all worked up. He couldn't figure out what the fuck was going on. So, let's do the 10 rules of writing, but for a horror story. I've played quite a few different horror games. In fact, most of the games that I've played are that horrible. It's a catch-all term: survival action adventure. Oh my god, survival action adventure. But out of all the games I've ever played, the only ones that have really scared me, one was Alone in the Dark, back on the PS1, back when I was a kid. I was very young, and I played that game and it scared me. But it's got good anticipation. It works its way up to all of a sudden you see a shadow and you're then there was Silent Hill, and I don't remember if it was 1, 2, or 3. It's one of the Silent Hill games that was back in the early days, PS2, and it was another one of those games. It built up and built up and built up, and then all of a sudden fucking zombie wolf tries to eat you, and it scares the living shit out of you. And the third, of course, was Amnesia. I don't know a single person that just like played that game and was totally fine with it. I actually made one of my friends almost like lose their mind because I walked into a room and he wasn't paying attention, had his earphones on while playing the game. I flicked the lights, the dude fell backwards out of his chair, broke the chair. Great times. So the trick to writing I'm elaborating. Trick to writing a good horror is anticipation. So 1, 2, 3. Characters stumble into a haunted house. Find an ancient relic. And ultimately unleash a horror that attempts to consume their minds. 3 points. Haunted house, find a relic, monster tries to consume minds. 5 points. While inside the haunted house, so they enter into the haunted house, and while in there, they find a candelabra. I like using that word. It has nothing to do with the plot. They find a candelabra that, when pulled, unlocks a secret room. Inside this room, ultimately they find their relic, but the relic has a foreboding presence that seems to implant into their minds that they should go into a different part of the mansion. So, then we elaborate again. 10 points. They enter into the haunted house. We know that we want them to find a secret room. What happens in between? What leads them there? Oh, we'll go with the old trope. They find a letter scrawled in blood saying they'll never find it, they'll never find it. Like a note from an insane man that gives them a clue to where to find this secret room. They ultimately find the secret room that contains the relic. They ultimately find the room that contains the secret relic, and we want to have a little bit of love towards those people that maybe they didn't take the investigative skill. They find a box. How about this? They find a box inside the secret room that, when opened, releases hundreds of scarabs. Once they have dispatched the scarabs or run away from them or whatever, that's where they find the relic. Okay. We know they find the relic and it needs to have some kind of mind control bit to it. So what if we made the adventure to where they can't escape the household at all? Like, there's just no possible way to do it, so they're kind of stuck in there for a while. And that'll kind of build up some anticipation because they'll feel helpless. Helplessness is always a good sticking point in a horror game. So, while this thing is slowly attempting to take control of the minds of one of them, one of them has multiple minds. No. While it's trying to take control of the mind of whoever holds the relic, it will give them some time to explore the mansion. And that's just where a good map is going to come in handy. So, as soon as they enter into the entranceway, they get into a living room. The living room is where they find their note, etc. So they don't have much contact with the house yet. But after finding the relic, that's when a larger portion of the map kind of opens up to them. It takes control of the mind of one of the PCs, player characters, or whatever your system calls them. Maybe... We want to build up to the horror being released. Ooh, the relic takes control of the mind of one of the PCs. The guy whose mind is taken over is the one who releases the horror. The horror is released, attempting to kill anything it finds in sight. I haven't even chosen a boss at this point. I just know that I want to have that be the final moment. So that way they don't know what's going to be in this house. If you're playing something that is natively a horror game, like you hand out the character sheets or everybody makes their character and it says Call of Cthulhu on it, they know there's going to be a moment where the monster comes out. But if this is in a Pathfinder game, maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know it's going to be a horror game, and that makes it all the funnier because they try to attack it first, because that's what you're like inclined to do in a Pathfinder game, is attack anything you find. You know, in Pathfinder, this boss might be a beholder. They're level 1 PCs, and a beholder comes out and just like immediately turns one to stone. Or I love the Shrieking Terrors. They're giant, multi-headed, multi-winged beasts that flap through the air haphazardly, consuming whatever they find. You know, it could be anything. As long as whoever's in the group, as a player, not as the character, recognizes, oh, fuck, this thing is going to kill me. If they don't, it just kind of, they die. And, you know, someone has to write up a new PC. So, here's the story in full. This is typical horror. Doesn't matter which system. You can play it in any system you want. The players stumble upon a haunted house. As they enter into the haunted house, the house shuts down, not allowing them to leave. Maybe you put magic on the windows, or maybe there aren't windows, you know, whatever you want to do. They continue through the house until they find a note. The note is scrawled by a madman. They'll never find it. They'll never find it. I have it so well hidden. Nobody'll guess to pull the candelabra. If I had more time, I'd probably write that better. So they find the secret room, because we kind of led them to it. They pull down the candelabra and enter into a dark tunnel. The tunnel eventually leads to a small room. A room that would normally never be found. Subterranean, maybe. Inside, they find a single wooden box. One of the characters, eventually, because they're looking for loot, opens the box. And when they do, hundreds of scarabs start pouring out. That's a challenge. It's kind of unnerving as well. They defeat the scarabs, and inside they find an ancient relic. Maybe it's a crown, or a cup, or maybe it's even a weapon. It's a sword, or even a gun. It could be, you know, a handgun. And they just never suspect that it's anything more than just a gun, you know. After they find the relic, they're free to explore the mansion for a while. You know, they can go through and enter into each room, and, you know, we can add little set pieces here and there. In the kitchen, you find a bloody knife is one of the best tropes. Before, eventually, whoever's holding the relic begins feeling the suggestion, the mind control. It tells him, go here, go into the basement, and look for the wooden portcullis. And eventually, drawn by his mind, the character walks off. And of course, the rest of the characters are, what the fuck is going on here? And they follow him. They all head down to the wooden portcullis, or whatever it is. Could be another lockbox. Could be kind of a theme. and the character has the compulsion. He must open this, and as he does, he pulls open the box, or he pulls the chain down on the portcullis, and now it stumbles. A horrible, shrieking terror, a terror. This is to you, Manjingos. Doesn't matter what game you're going to try to DM. You can pick whatever genre you want. Think about your characters first, or think about the players first. You know, if it's a bunch of guys, don't run a romance game. It's going to get awkward. If it's a bunch of girls, don't run a blood and gore game. It's going to get awkward. Or maybe not, if they're cool. You know, depends. Anyway, point of the matter is, run whatever genre you pick. You can do it no matter what the rule system is, and you can still use the same trick. That's all I got for today. For everybody watching, I hope you're having a wonderful day, and until next time.